Feeling all sorts of tightness in my hips. I really need to go through like some energetic movements and just excite and insight a good energetic pathway through my tensor fasciculata, my glute medius, rather than doing like just a strictly tension producing assault. Like the hips really go through some shit sleeping, but also the glute and the glutens, they really do a number on the hips. And I really do believe that if you just rinse off the starch, you don't get the same type of thing, but you really are washing away nutrients as well. And the starch is necessary when you're trying to take advantage of every bit of calories that you're taking in. So yeah, my glucose levels have been elevated since last night, downing the amount of ice cream that I did. And so we're going to use a little apple cider vinegar and try to right this, get a little adjustment phase going here. Yeah, instantly you can feel that stuff go to work. So I'm trying to do some not so sloppy videos and just try to wrap my head around doing more formatted video instruction, because I pull from so many different areas. But I don't have my laboratory, I don't have my subjects, I don't have my training facility, right? Where the alchemy takes place, where the people take place, right? Where observably you're looking at these genetic propensities that tie into behavior, you know? But lately I've just been looking at my true ability and my true and the truth about society that I talked about in the last live stream. And then did about 35 minutes of continuous walking. Now we're just trying to get the blood flow pattern going, ease the stomach a little bit. I took some supplements. I took the creatine and the trimethyl glycine. I think it's definitely made a difference. The issue that I have is the quality is there. Even a morphological reduction in breast tissue, breast fat, has notably from the anterior is pronounced in the chest area, to the point where the obfuscation with the side boob is right in this general region. And so we're building up the chest. So it's exactly what I set out as I went, I'm not going to reduce anymore. I'm building, I'm focusing in on building. I got to the point where it's like, this is going to take one fuck of a lot of time. Like, it takes a certain amount of time, but you can accelerate that. And they say kill two birds with one stone. I'd rather not kill any birds or do any sort of witchcraft bullshit. Stink ass witch hose. I'd rather build myself up to fullness, right? Development, and boost those engines up, get that 10, let's say 13 cylinder, right? There's an esoteric number. Boost up those engines to where you got so much muscle going and so much power going and so much energy demand, right? That you're just burning the fat away. I am. And so if I were to add on another 15 to 25 pounds of muscle, which may or may not be possible, particularly without cheats, you know, it's like you have to understand that the cheats are entirely necessary. When you're naturally building your body up, there is no conceivable way that with 3,300 to 5,000 calories, you're going to get enough of everything. You're not going to get enough anabolic stimulus at the same time as balancing out your nutrient profiles. This is what people are doing. They're like, okay, I'm going to have this many berries, and then I'm going to chop up this many mangoes, and they're theoreticians, right? So they're sitting there and they're listening to these highbrow dietitians who look like shit. And if they do look good, they're following the textbook when they tell you one thing, and right? And then when you look at them and you ask them a question, say, what do you do for yourself, or what would you recommend to your son or your child, right? It's kind of like they're very different. So they're estheticians, right? They're dealing with the veneer. They're dealing with surface bullshit that doesn't really exist. It's a form of craft, right? And this does lead into personal training, because personal trainers are put under the guise of the esthetician when they're dealing with the intricate inner workings of the individual, and they have to understand sports psychology. They have to get to know that person, right? But where intimacy, right? People who are these lonely people who have to pay for their time with other people, like it's like a bartender, right? It's like the bartender ends up, you know, look, have 3 drinks and then talk to me about your problems, because I'd rather hear the drunk you that I could kick out legally if you go too far, but at least I'm hearing the truth, right? So there's this diagnostic aspect to listening to people's bullshit, and especially when they think they're never going to see you again, or that they know you're busy all the time, or they think you're busy all the time and you're broke, and they're not worried about who you're going to go talk to because they could tell how many problems you got. So they're going to load off all their bullshit information on you and leave and try to do craft on you, right? And this is how it's done. And craft is being done on a minor scale every single day, but these aren't the people who instituted and constructed the social contract, or the social networking that's taking place in society, right? And it does lead into the Odd Fellows and all this other shit, you know, this Society of the Cincinnati. I mean, it does lead into that, very much so. I liked that program last night, or the night before last, that JJ Vance was hosting, Operation GCD, where Tim Constantine from Sixth Sensory came in, and I'm really looking forward to listening to more of his interviews. Stay the fuck away from Bigfoot, all right? If you really want to know how to chase people away, you're going to talk about Bigfoot. Look, what was depicted as Bigfoot, there are so many other sightings, from the Hyperborean Nords that were seen many times and experienced up around the Shasta Mountains, to skinwalkers, shape-shifting, and the other ranches around that area and in other places where the description of these morphological beings could be better manifested and displayed. So since the first Bigfoot sighting, I know nothing about that. I don't want to. I think people who are interested in that are complete and total idiotic Bigfoot nerds. And I've never liked the whole Bigfoot concept, and I've always seen how it's leading people who like flashy, dangly things in a certain direction, so I don't even want to fucking talk about it, okay? It actually pisses me off. I'm a kid from the 70s, right? So it's like 70s and 80s, it's like, do you know how much tabloid ridiculousness has been thrown around about that shit? How people have been fucked with, and all these pictures that have been taken falsely, and how that just leads into this whole disclosure headache and all the other shit. Don't trust Jesse Michaels, by the way, or Gary Nolan, or any of these people through the Soul Foundation. Don't trust any of those people. Take it with a grain of salt. But you want to look at the wider exposure and the geographical regions and areas, not of just one, sighting of a specific cryptid type phenomenon, right? But what I was going to say is, look, so if you were to go back and say, okay, when was the first sighting? Let's say 60 years, maybe further back. Maybe you even get into this weird Stalin-esque bullshit where they were successful at breeding primates with human beings, right? And that they were doing this operationally to create another subset of human beings that could be another PSYOP situation where they could say this, like Ryan Bledsoe introducing this idea on a countermeasure on the back scale and saying, yeah, my father, Chris Bledsoe, he was talking about this race of people that may or may not be coming here. I don't remember the exact details, right? But conveying that these are like Bigfoots, that these are huge, hairy creatures that on the external and the existential look like Bigfoots, right? Yeah, this is some real postulate shit going on. Like, he covers so many PSYOP bases, and he's so willing to work with the government and be close to the hip. And there's a direct correlation back to this British intelligence, John Dee, occulted hieroglyphic monad witchcraft, right? Where it goes back to all hail the king, the queen, right? They want you to think that there's a disparate measure between the king and the queen, which is, let's be real, the Druids, the Knights of Malta, the Freemasons. Of course, there's factions and breakoffs, but they regard the king as, and they even place the king, right? And then you get into pharaohs, and you get into messiahs, you get into true spiritual leaders, right? But that they follow the way of the male way, right? So you could even further depict this into Anu, the creator god, right? And why Anu fell from grace. And then you get into Tiamat, his whore of a daughter who prostituted herself around enough with her own son that Kingu became her lover and her son, and was her son, right? And then you have the offspring of what I would call, and what I have called in writing, is like Shad Anunnaki, right? So you have these 11 personas, or these personalities that emerge from a zodiacal sense, right? And this war with this witch, right? That's heavily depicted with Hathor, Mother Circe, and so forth, and that these are the females, and this is the modern rendition of the anthropological female, new female in society. That this is not. So they want you to think that there's this Sophia, this Gnostic concept of a divine feminine. Show me proof that there's anything divine or virtuous about any female, because there isn't. In fact, it's disgusting. When you really piece it apart and look at it, and you get past all this normative social gifts, why open the door for a female? Why do this? Like, how brainwashed are you? How brainwashed are you, right? And so you get into this idea where you're going, this is a person who's using lesser Enochian or Solomonic magic, but these are males that are being identified. The truth is that you have the feminine cards being played, and that in witchcraft they know about this. These so-called arcana. And when they talk about houses and they're using, they're bringing down kingdoms, they live parasitically. So a witch is a parasite. She doesn't even question herself about parasitic actions. She lives by way of, in and of community. Whereas, so this really gets into some dark territory, okay? Because what's left is the Zoroaster as this perfect and pure sun that Jason Reza Giorgiani, in his all his efforts, which are vast, says it probably took place around 500 BC. Okay, and so when you're talking about like 2,500 years, that brings things into view, into scope a little too close for comfort, especially if there's different timelines going on here. And I'm not saying that there's 800 to 1,200 years missing, or 700, but I'm not saying there's not. I think there's several parallel, confusing timelines, and I think that it's based around certain zodiacal presentations or presentments, right? Where something happened much more recently than the great galactic cycle, or even the half cycle that leads into the Younger Dryas and can further be segmented into 8 basic segments. But you always have a 9th, you always have a 10th, you always have an 11th, right? So you can segment this even further when you start to look at it. And this is what this is what geography is based on, but it's what like geomancy or geometrical constants, right? That there is no difference between this spherical global body and any other inference of an orb or a sphere, right? But it should be noted that like an orb is very distinct, is very separate from a spherical body. A sphere represents something that's dynamic, whereas an orb could be seen as a very dull expression of a potential, right? So a depiction of an orb might be through the looking glass, right? A crystal ball, where it's a definite. So when you say crystal ball, right, it gets into these areas of distinction where you say you have crystal, right? You have a definite crystalline structure. So you get into thermodynamics, you get into absolute zero, you get into how the perfect crystalline structure might be created and manifested into form, and then the conditions that support this, right? And then you have further disambiguation when you're looking at diamonds, right? Hard, ready to cut, reproducible, just like gold. And then you get into other amalgamated artifices that describe planets, just like iron and nickel, right? Copper, where you have a higher and lower composite of different planetary bodies that influence other systems and lead into the culmination of things like the Venus pentagram alignment, which it's beginning to look like that's at the head of yeah, I hope these little kids are all right, man. It's weird. I hope these little kids are okay. So, we want to be heroes, but how much of you is involved? Like, you're a real hero when you have your camera out and you're busting these CP rings, and but when you get down to who you really are, the reason that people don't do more is because they aren't more. They're conflicted. They're entirely selfish and jealous, or there's a malignant aspect to them that's muted, right? And so when you look at sacrifice, is that you're going to have to sacrifice one aspect of yourself for another. And it leads directly into what I'm talking about, which is this composited information. So there's information and distance. So you have a polarity discrepancy between two planetary bodies that not only conduct through a rotation, right? A rotational orbit, but also repel and also generate to a lesser scale what we end up finding as nuclear force. Nuclear force needs to be looked at much more deeply than gravity. I think that gravity is actually taken from nuclear force and is on a grander scale could be actually identified as nuclear force. It's essentially the glue that holds us together. We have to stop sensationalizing the phenomenon of gravity and how we're going through this personal sensation with it, but more so seeing that gravity, what does it do? It sticks you to the ground. And then if you were to see this from the nuclear perspective, the nuclear force perspective, you'd go, well, that's what makes these amino acids congruently have the capacity to really stick together enough to then go about the actions that amino acids go through a geometric unity, if you will, right? And for all these other elements to come into play. There's this idea that ontology just randomly takes place. That it's sort of this pouring out instantized life where there isn't an engineering imprint, right? And not only are we able to reproduce gold, right, better. This is what they don't want you to know, is that they're making better gold than gold. They're able to refine this. They're making better diamonds than the best diamond you could ever find. They've been doing this for a long ass time. And they're using this to build up an entire society. And they're recreating the conceptualization of an Atlantis, but when you really look at Manly P. Hall, Albert Pike, they were very aware of this. There's nothing heroic about them. That you were never invited into the party. It's like, why do we exist? Good question. Then you get into this idea of Lush, a soul energy. But people think in a very critical sort of way where it's like, and I don't mean that in a good way. I mean critical as in criticism, as in short-sightedness, where they think about themselves, they think about their own solution, the postulate or the posit that they are someone, that they exist in and of themselves, that they are, in fact, individuals, and that they're worried about their own hide. Rather than, what is this human experience? Where is this going? And why would I be going through this experience? In other words, this aspect of the totality, now that I know the goal and the projection, and now that I have a little bit of the historicity and I can mimetically piece this together, what is my role, right? When we talk about roles, it's like roles that you're given. So you can genetically take it on, but then there are roles that you can't see, but that are highly important and even more critical, because you have people who can influence gravity. And even more, people are so indoctrinated to think that, here you have this Marvel superhero, right? Where in fact, all of these superheroes that are celebrated are psychical, right? And they're just beginning to really expound upon this and introduce this to go, look, hey, you had Superman, but did you know Friedrich Nietzsche wasn't writing about Superman in that way? Okay. And that's not really what the Superman ever was, the Overman. Okay, so did you know that if somebody's able to actually get in, if Superman did exist, you could take the most vile, pernicious, corrupted witch, and excuse the explicit aspect of this, but it's just the truth, is you take Gilgamesh, who is supposedly like more like Thanos or something, right? And you go, look, if you put a full-time high-level witch or a group of witches on Gilgamesh's ass, literally, tickling his bunghole, inciting thoughts and corruption, making Gilgamesh gay, or think he's gay, whispering in his ear 24 hours, right? Even building up technology that would do this for you to where you don't even have to do this all the time. That is how you change the operation, right? Then you begin to see that this is happening all around us all the time. It's changing the order. It's an induction. It's the reason why the cremation of care is Bohemian Grove is an aspect of they don't really need to do anything. They're showing up on a particular high holiday and they're going, look, whether it's occulted or not, and they're going, look, we, throughout this lifetime being involved in these various arms and wings of these named organizations that don't need an existential name, right? You've come to a place where you've finally burned the effigy, you burn the falsity, and as long as people ignorantly follow along with an existential idea of themselves and believe in the straw man, well, we'll keep it going, right? So what's the critical factor? What are they looking for? They're looking for the Superman, the Messiah. The Jews like to call him an Antichrist because what's an Antichrist? It's somebody who isn't a Jew and isn't for Jews. Okay? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Antichrist isn't for Jews, doesn't support Jews, is entirely anti-Semitic, which everyone is. You got anti-Semitism occurring within the Semites. You got rabbis' wives at odds, spending money and talking shit about their own husbands, right? You got so much internal conflict. And all they did was supplicate to the Venusian pentagram, right? Through cycles. Oh man, my back. So, right. So how do we break free from this? Well, it's pretty complex because we were made in the same way that these planetary bodies were put together and amalgamated in such a way where the relevance of the composite and the distance and the orbital pattern is irrelevant and needs to be will not naturally congruently go back into an ontological smooth, we'll say linear formatting, right? And so we're built the same way. We can't exist in any other environment than the one that we live in here. We are in prison. We are in prison based on the gas, based on the gas exchange, based on so many other things. But the true spiritual self, if you will, doesn't experience the physical pain. You can bring it on with you. The true spiritual self doesn't buy into this shit, and in fact is only making effort to go back to its familiar linear existence, right? And when that pull becomes strong enough, there's an entire other dimensional aspect of existence that is taking place. But uniformly, it's been disrupted. Uniformly, there's been a massive, great disturbance, right? So you get into these concepts of, well, where the fuck is God, right? And the God comes from the realization of active principles. So you can get into the concept and then way beyond the concept because it's not even conceptual of purity, of a pure source. You have to. You have to look at the very axis, the nexus, the core of what makes everything tick, what makes it turn. But you get into this idea of Anu, right, as being this Adam and Eve, Adam type character of this ignorant man who didn't know anything about anything. And he was, in fact, a big sucker, but he was the power supply. He was required, so you get into appeasement and usury and what's really going on here, right? And how it is necessary, deception is necessary from the feminine sense to continue on the biological. So Jesus was against the race of humanity and saw that humanity was faltered and flawed, and where little do they know, right? Do not blame them kind of thing, paraphrasing, where it's like the people are fully unaware of what they're even doing. But they are aware, right? They are very aware. And it's a way of looking at the Goy or the Gentiles and saying, well, they're stupid. And in fact, there's so much racial intermixing at this point with these bloodlines that understand craft, that it's in the genetics, and that this is really what celebrity and Hollywood is based on. It's not the full-on Jews, right? And it's not even Jews themselves, but other races, particularly occulted races, that aren't talked about very often, right? That lead back to a proto species of purity and enlightenment that I believe the Hyperboreans only loosely represent, So you really do have this idea of God's people, but the Jews are not those people, right? They're standing in, just like the Pope is standing in on the throne until God's return, knowing that God never will return. But in saying that, God will return, meaning the higher order of principle, right? And then this is an energy, and then strikingly, this energy has a voice, has an identity, isn't amalgamated when the people come together and realize their flaws, realize their ways, and realize what the most important thing is. This is where you have this ideation of this council, this holy council that we come back to over and over and over. We want to believe that there's these holy wise men, right? These people that are very holy and wise. And never has there been a female that is trustworthy. And this is a hard thing to come to, and it's entirely blocked in our society. It is the most important thing to convince females and everyone else that this is hogwash, this is bullshit, to force a cymatic supplication of the male into the female, to even blend in so much female into the genetics through these X chromosome influences as to wash away. There's even a 4X, or it's not a 4X, but it's an extra X male, that's been found. And a lot of times these motherfuckers are warriors, They're finding clues that are showing, because there's probably what you've got is you might have agromyalgic reaction where you've got these very large creatures with very small phallus, right? That really aren't meant, so this gets into Rosicrucianism a little bit, right? But have a high propensity toward growth hormone and are in fact very large people, but they're not sexual. They're able to transcend the energy that they have, right? Beyond the sexual lower, when you get into energetics and so forth. So this is real, right? This is real talk that we're talking about, and may even be at the root of Arturian legend and lore, right? Now you can look this shit up because it's for real. So it's getting pretty hot in here. Uncomfortable. I'm going through the thermic effect, but it's also just a really stale heat, but it's tolerable. But it makes it difficult to go into like esoteric talk in esoteric detail. And the important thing is that I'm moving, that I'm putting information into the field. You're just merely a bystander. The subscribers don't matter. The fact that you see it doesn't matter. I'm putting information into the field, into the computational system. Like if you haven't put that together, then you need to wake the fuck up. Because the information that goes into the system, even if it's erased, it's a part of the system, right? So all the darkest aspects of us, but really what's been done to us is how it's seen and how it's noted. Because we are, the thing about it is that we are considered ignorant and stupid. And that works in our favor because we are this amalgamation of all these different genetic propensities and influence. And they are ultimately searching for a particular individual that is all part of this, where they're trying to identify an individual that, against all odds, against everything. And when you talk about odds, you are talking about like a sort of lottery number system, right? Some people will never win the lottery. Some people are designed for the numbers to work against them, and that they have been given information on an energetic vortex or toroidal field that doesn't deal with corporeal temporal number subsets. When you have somebody who's winning the lottery, you have somebody who's also chained to and a part of the carnal process of the world. And you have been trained to think that somebody like that is actually a clairvoyant or prescient, right? But in fact, they didn't do anything. They're not aware of anything. They were suggested and told to buy a ticket or to choose a certain number, or they just showed up at a certain time and they win it. And so even if they don't win the lottery, you see this luck, right? But they're actually not lucky, they're unlucky. So the description of that is that if you're tied into the temporal and there's any implication that you have a temporal identity, then you are false. Then you are a construct, a manufacturer, an engineered aspect to the computational subset. So you'd think people would understand this, but they don't, because the larger majority isn't this pure source individual. In fact, you get into this whole thing and you begin to see that they are living off the light or the energy, if you will, of this particular individual, and even more so of this class of people, where existence wouldn't even take place if it weren't for the induction or the existence of this one individual. And you could look at this and scrutinize it, or you could go, well, without the sun. So this is the talk of the Son of God and so forth, right? Without the sun, none of us would exist, right? Which I'm not really sold on any of that. I really am not. You can't believe any of this shit. They're giving you this cosmic solar system ideation to brainwash you into believing certain things, because they want to give you just enough so that if you believe that the cosmos, that the universe is constructed in a specific way, then that on a localized, use case event, that you are thus an aspect or a part of this. They want to know what's going on in your head, what's going on in your body, what's going on with your energy. How's this affecting you? How's this making you work, right? Where the truth is that it is about a point in time, time-space signature of an event as a life in existence, a life under influence, but a life that is heavily influencing all other life. And based on the exposure to this, a transcendence is supposedly quite possibly taking place, but not necessarily. Like, isn't that bizarre that all this time, money, resource would be based on proposition? Propositional awareness. Something that doesn't quite, or that potentially exists, but doesn't necessarily exist. The Son of God, right? The Son of God. So any true God, somebody who had this upper ability, this unexplainable ability, would be murdered, would be hung on a cross. People wouldn't be able to stop thinking. They wouldn't be able to stop realizing what they are, and then they wouldn't be able to stop the influence that's being done to them. Your own mother has and will hang you on a cross. Your own kids would do the same thing. So it's like, who are you, So everybody's going through this in a sense, but then they come to their senses, some, and they go, I want stuff, right? This is the world that I live in. This is the stuff that I want, right? I want my cake and eat it too. Which is the statement of the modern day female. I want my cake and eat it too. Yeah. So we're going to be, I'm beginning to remember the energy now that I was dealing with my workouts is, I was trying to take in enough calories the prior day in the form of carbohydrates to fuel me to the point where I wouldn't get bogged down by a huge meal the next day, and I'd be able to just go into training. I think I'm going to be adding bread in next month. But bread is expensive. I might have to try and get everything I need to bake my own bread and make some sourdough. Because I miss bread. I miss bread a lot. It's quick, it's easy. And it does help with training, because it's like you can you can eat a certain number of calories, and then it quickly assimilates into your system, and you can just, get those carbs up and go, particularly like honey on bread. That was always a really good go-to, maybe a little bit of yogurt with that. So we'll be thinking about some affordable possibilities next month that will allow for some the purchase of some good high quality foods. So I had 35 minutes for the first portion of the walk, and then I've got 51 minutes. And I'm not sure. I think most females are going through the same thing, where they're like, they see the witchcraft, they feel it within them. They see the forced notion, and they're going, can I be good? Is anyone good? Right? Can I rise above or go beyond the corporeal carnal aspects? And I think they're searching, but I think ultimately any female would, it's just like cutting carbohydrates out. Eventually you're going to eat carbohydrates. Glycolysis is inevitable. It's like, as long as you're a human being, you're living on this planet, there's not some major changes in us, through us, to us. There's just no damn way that you're going to be able to switch ketosis over and, and replace that with glycolysis. It's not happening. And these doctors and these people are making so much money off of it. But what I found is I was shrinking ever smaller. And I had adopted this idea that being smaller was the natural way. You look at like Asian people, but you don't take into account that their lives are so callously, the quality of their lives is looked past by their government, particularly China, right? Japan ain't normal, okay? And the same crazy ass weird government follows everyone around. And one could say that the government becomes the same government universally everywhere all the time. That it's unavoidable and undeniable. All right, it's probably about time. So we got about an hour and a half of walking. Probably about time that I have a little oatmeal and start in with my carbohydrates. Yesterday I ate 4 packets of oatmeal. That's what I'll probably be doing today. I may have another scoop of protein powder. I might even put a little bit of cream of wheat in with that, just to boost up the carbs. I find myself going right at a certain value or number of carbohydrates. And that number is like 400 to 600 grams. Like, I'm looking for growth, but I also need to promote enough intensity in my training. So we're going to be going back and visiting some chest and back for sure. I'm dealing with a lot of hip problems that have kept me away from doing leg training, and I love to do leg training. I need to be doing more stretching, but the load from the bands is not working for me. The angle isn't working for me. And I love working legs, but it's proving to be very difficult for me. And I think I'm just going to have to go into like an easier rhythm with my leg training. And I can already see it like going into more single leg movement patterns. I've always had issues with the knees and so forth. When I have a squat rack, I load on serious fucking weight and do lots of high reps with squats. I love squats. They help my back out. They help, but I don't have that ability. And you really have to have a good rack. You have to have the proper weights. Like it's you have to put a padding on your back. It takes a while. It takes several weeks, if not months, to like sink into heavy squats. But they're at the basis of. Without those squats, you really can't build a functional, proper routine. So you can't even really consider yourself going in and intensely training and doing a formatted bodybuilding. There's a lot of people that just live on the surface that call themselves bodybuilders or seem to be doing a bodybuilding self-prescriptive program, but not until you're fucking loading that squat rack on are you getting the growth hormone effect and the base stimulus for growth, right? And I think for people who can't endure that axial load, but would be on a leg press, but you'd really have to prove to me that, I'm sure there's many people who exist like that, where they've got some asymmetrical anomalies going or whatnot, right? Spinal issues, whatever, right? Where they just can't load that axial skeleton. And they're still able to do like 45-degree leg presses, right? But the 45-degree leg press would be second, it would be a secondary thing. And then it might go into like a sort of a angled squat where you're actually back at an angle with your feet in front of you, right? That just tends to disperse at least the gravity of the squat, right? And it's really about the foot position. It kind of dorsiflexes the foot. Really is what's happening. Pointing the toes a little more toward you, getting a little more gastrocnemius stretch going on there. And then seated calf raises, like those are so fucking important to be able to load on some heavy fucking soleus work. And then to be able to do hip, a multi-hip, like to go in and to be able to work the glute medius, stretching out the tensor fasciolata to work the peroneal muscles, in the frontal plane. Then to be able to actualize a movement that, involves then like a time under tension, static hold, a walkout, lateral walkout where you're getting more of the quadratus lumborum and so forth, which you can initiate and activate just in a side bridge or a plank, particularly one where you're going through the action, right? A hip action and then a kick through the frontal plane to the side. But those become crucial, right? And we want to get to the place where we have enough power producing where we can do dynamic exercises, right? Explosive exercises. So I really need to figure out how I'm going to challenge my my lower body. And I've been having a lot of hip issues, a lot of tightness. But I'm going to go in and eat. I'm tempted to just fucking eat this pasta and eat a big chicken pasta meal and then let that digest over the course of the next 2 or 3 hours. So I'm not puking up while I work out and go into a nice workout today. Because either way, it's got to get done.